hired their first full-time customer service executive, which helped with all of the guests and helping support the properties. Then in 2005, a company called Active Hotels was bought by the Priceline Group, which is now known as Booking Holdings. And in 2005, they also bought Bookings.nl, which was the name of the company at the time. Fast forward a few years, in 2017, we're operating in over 220 countries with over 190 offices worldwide. And now here we are today with over 17,000 employees and over 28 million listings on the site. Our mission for Booking.com currently is to empower people to experience the world. So what I want to do with you guys is just to imagine if we fast track into the future to 2030. I'm sure that many of us have spent time trying to look into the future and trying to understand how things are going to play out. Maybe how our businesses will be, what the economy will be like, what will happen to our friends and family, global warming, all of these things. What we do know is predicted for 2030 is that the world's population is growing, and it's expected to reach about 8.5 billion people. And of these 8.5 billion people, about 1.8 billion of them will be doing international trips around the world. So we know that the travel industry is growing. We've heard that many, many times today. It's dynamic, it's fast-paced, and it's moving in a direction that we've never really seen before. If we think about the travel industry and all the attention that it has, it's great. It brings good to the economy, it provides jobs, it allows for interaction between cultures and people to have different learning experiences, but it also brings a lot of challenges and a lot of pressure for companies in the international market to really evolve and adapt their business to meet with these trends. So it's not just numbers that we know are changing, but it's definitely the traveler expectations. And I think really one of the buzzwords of today has been the millennials, so I am still going to talk about it. But I guess one thing that we know is that the message is pretty consistent across all the speeches, that the millennials are really the ones that we need to look to within the market already now, but for sure as well in the future. So there's many, many different travel trends that are impacting our businesses and things that we need to consider. There's 3 that I'm just going to touch on here. Some of them actually have already been mentioned from previous speakers. The first one is leisure travel. So leisure travel is not something that's necessarily new, but it's something that we're seeing definitely grow. So we can see here that 48% of millennials actually extend their business trips when they travel. And it's actually predicted that by 2020, about 50% of the business flight sales will be coming from millennials doing these types of trips. So this is definitely a type of opportunity that businesses need to be aware of and able to maximize on. Another one which I'm sure all of us have experienced is option shock, the complete overwhelming feeling that you get when you can search online now when you're looking to plan or book your holiday, not just within accommodations, but with experiences, places to go, things to see, things to do, and things to eat. Users these days, they look to use 1 or 2 platforms to really be able to give them this entire experience. Yes, they like to research and look online, but they look for platforms that can give them payment solutions, recommendations, guest reviews, book accommodation that suits their needs for the unique experience that they're trying to create. Then also there's the one of artificial intelligence, so the increasing of automation, we have robotization, all of these things that are happening that's really evolving and changing the experiences that guests are having. When I look back on a trip I recently had in Singapore, I called up the front desk for them to bring an iron to my room. And actually what I found when I opened my door was a robot that had delivered me the iron, which was shocking, something that I also wasn't used to. The next morning when I went down for breakfast, the buffet breakfast, a robot actually made my omelette as well that morning. So these are different and weird kind of scenarios that are coming up that is also influencing traveler behavior, expectations, and experiences as well. So it's not just companies within the travel industry that are really starting to evolve and set the expectations for guests. It's also many, many brands and companies outside of the travel industry that are also really setting these expectations for travelers. So if we think of huge companies like Amazon that really evolved things like delivery times and instantaneous expectations, I think a more localized example and to a completely different level is obviously with Gojek here in Indonesia. You can get your nails done, a massage, any type of food basically sent to your door within just a couple of swipes and clicks. Also companies like Starbucks that really streamline the service when you walk into each of their stalls. So these are things that are really evolving the experiences that guests are having and are really challenging global travel companies as well to adopt these types of experiences of on-demand, frictionless, and personalized. Now, the experience for people and guests when they're looking to book and stay within the travel industry. The challenge, I guess, is that it's all about the journey. It's not necessarily just one part of the experience. It involves guests throughout the pre-stay, the stay, and definitely the post-stay. If we have a look here, many of us, and it's been a lot of the topic of conversation today, for us to really truly try and find out who are our guests, who is it that we're trying to market, who are maybe not our guests now, but we want them to be our guests in the future. And it can be sometimes quite difficult to really collect a lot of valid information on exactly what our guests' needs are and what their expectations are. Some of them travel, or most of them travel actually relatively infrequently. They can sometimes be anonymous customers. They can use various different platforms. Maybe you only have an experience of a certain point of their journey when they interact with you or your brand or your product. And also they travel very differently based on who they're traveling with, when they're going, and the purpose of their trip. So holistically, it's really hard to try and collect all of this information of our travelers these days. One of the things that we did relatively recently is we conducted 2 big surveys. The most recent one was in March this year, where we surveyed about 20,000 people around the world, of people that have recently come back from a trip or are currently planning for a future trip in the next 12 months. We took a selection of people from all around the world, including over 1,000 travelers from Indonesia itself. And we asked them a whole bunch of questions about their expectations, their thoughts, their feelings, what they expect when they travel, what they expect in terms of accommodation. And really there was quite a consistent theme of the responses that we received. And a lot of this is sort of around this limitless travel. So really unbordering themselves and experiencing new things, the sky's the limit. So what we found is actually over half of the travelers actually thought that going outside of their comfort zone is what they look for these days when they travel. So it's not necessarily going back and experiencing the same thing, but really broadening the experiences that they have. Here were also some things that we found. So the top 5 getaways that they would take if they weren't afraid. So volunteering, digital detox, things like living with locals. These are all the types of experiences and things that guests are now looking for just beyond the regular travel experience. Okay, and then looking at trips that really do provide them with this limitless travel expectation that they're setting. Road trips, long distance trains, backpacking, hiking, gourmet adventure. A lot of feedback and responses were all about the food and the culture, not just the destination. But also you can see here road trip and long distance train is also about the journey of how they get there. So it's a much more holistic experience that they're after. Breaking it down a little bit further and then saying, okay, what is it exactly that you look for in terms of accommodation to provide you with this limitless travel expectation that you have? A lot of them are looking for accommodation that doesn't just provide them a place to sleep and a place to eat, but those that really help them embrace things like the outdoors, the availability of cuisine, but local cuisine that they can experience that's based on the destination that they are. They also after tech-savvy accommodation. Self-catered accommodation, and really being able to use the accommodation for gaining additional experiences and exposure to the destination that they're in. Even things like staying with local families and host families is something that's coming up more and more, and getting off the beaten track and having experiences and staying in hotspots that are very unique for them. Some of the traveller accommodation trends, so we actually found that 4 in 10 travellers plan to stay in rental properties when they're planning for their next trip. A quarter of them are also considering getting involved in the industry by listing their own properties online. 65% of them actually choose more eco-friendly options, so that's definitely a theme that's more so on travellers' mind. And they're definitely trying to look for accommodation experiences that they've never experienced before. Taking a little bit of a further look into Indonesian travel behaviours. So I don't know if you can read this graph pretty well, but I'll kind of talk through some of it with you. So basically, this is breaking down the difference between domestic and international travel for Indonesians and ranks some of the priorities that they look for in accommodation. So the highest priority for those traveling domestically is actually a safe location, followed by cleanliness of the hotel and free Wi-Fi in the room. For international travelers, the priority is slightly different but somewhat the same. So they actually look for cleanliness and Wi-Fi over the fact of a safe location. But overall, the consistent responses that we found from the Indonesian travelers, that they're looking for places with an amazing view, with free Wi-Fi, variety of food choices, quality of local cuisine, and delicious breakfast. Now, 3 out of those 5 things are all to do with food. In my short time living here in Indonesia, I know how important food is to Indonesians. My team have told me that if I only put on 5 kilos, then I'm doing an excellent job. But they actually want me to put on 10 kilos because it means I'm enjoying the cuisine and the food here in Indonesia. But this is a very important attribute and thing that they look for, definitely when traveling domestically and internationally. Here is a bit of a snapshot of travel budget allocation. So we also looked at international and domestic, and we asked them, okay, when you're planning for your trip, firstly, what is your budget and what portion of your budget is going to these various elements? What was interesting was for domestic and international, the percentage contribution was actually almost exactly the same. So whether they're traveling within Indonesia or outside, they're spending around 25% of their budget on accommodation. The second highest is transport to the destination, and the third highest is actually on food. When we look at the difference between the spend on domestic and international, it's about a 77% higher budget that they're allocating when they're traveling internationally than when they are domestically. Here's also a bit of a snapshot based on Google Trend queries. So we have a look at like the search queries and the clicks that are coming in from Google into destinations within Indonesia. So these are the top domestic destinations that we're seeing in terms of demand through Google. So we can see very clear West Java, Jogja, and East Java. The fastest growing is actually Yogyakarta and Central Java. Here's the list that I won't read through, but this is basically summarizing what we're seeing and experiencing on Booking.com currently as the top booked destinations for Indonesia. So the first list on the left-hand side is the top 10 domestic destinations, and on the right-hand side are the top 10 outbound destinations that Indonesians are traveling to. Here we have another graph. Again, it's outlining this time the difference between business and leisure travel for the top 10 domestic destinations. Business travel is definitely a type of travel that we're seeing a big increase in through Booking.com. In some destinations, obviously stronger than others. This is also quite an interesting space. I think it's new-ish for us because we built our whole platform and our whole brand around leisure travel, but we actually found that with the leisure travel and the increase of business travel changing, I think also Airbnb played a really big role in that, where they really influenced the market and changed the mindset of how business people can travel, and allowing that flexibility and enticing them to say, hey, just because you're traveling for business doesn't mean that you stay in the same hotel every time. You can still have a local kind of experience and stay in different types of accommodations. So we're also seeing definitely an increase in this trend on our site. Here is also showing the source markets, so who is actually coming into Indonesia. So on the left-hand side, we have our current top 5 international source markets, and this mix of 5 makes up about 35% of the total inbound into Indonesia. Then on the right-hand side, we have the top 5 fastest growing inbound source markets to Indonesia. Okay, so here I'm touching a little bit on the book window. So we know a little bit about our travelers, who they are, what they're expecting, where they want to go, how much money they want to spend, but when are they actually going to book? This, I guess, is the tricky one. What we're finding with the trend is that there's more and more last minute, and I'm sure this is absolutely no surprise to 99% of the people here in the room. What may be a surprise is just how much of the business is coming in last minute. So this is a graph indicating the book window for Indonesia as a whole. As you can see here, it's about 56% of the bookings are coming with inside 7 days. In some destinations, same-day reservations alone is sitting at around 20%. And then as you can see, obviously, the further away the stay date, the shorter number of people are coming to stay. But this trend is definitely not changing. If anything, we're seeing this graph get more and more heavy towards the last-minute bookings. So this really changes the behavior of guests. They do actually expect that instantaneous confirmation. They want the availability, they want the perfect hotel, and they want it available when they're on the train on the way to arrive there. So in general, I've gone through that pretty quickly, but hopefully it's provided a little bit of insight. We all know how fast the travel industry is really growing and evolving. I think it's a really interesting time with the millennials. It's the most connected and tech-savvy market that we've ever had to appeal to. It's growing and evolving. I think it's a really competitive space, particularly here within the emerging markets where there's so much opportunity. We're all here because we know there's opportunity in the market. There's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of entrepreneurship. So it's something, I guess, that we all need to reflect on. We need to still continue to keep our eyes open, be open to change, and really learn about our guests and understand what elements of our business we need to continue to change and which elements of our business we need to keep consistent. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day.